Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad you could join us today to discuss how you can install Bestbath product confidently for lasting results. My name is Chanel Wilson, and I am the marketing manager here at Bestbath, and I'll be your host for today's session. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes to make sure we all have a smooth experience. This session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with all who are registered, as well as any resources referenced today. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the questions box at the bottom of your page, and we'll have a Q&A segment at the end. Okay, let's get started. I'd like to introduce you all to Jason Williams, Bestbath's Regional Dealer Sales Manager for the Great Lakes and Southeast Territories, and Bob Cook, Bestbath's Engineering Manager. Take it away, guys.
What's up, Bob?
How you doing, Jason?
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for the intro, and I do appreciate everyone for hopping on. And please feel free to submit questions. We're doing this to increase education, and the best way to do that is through questions and answers. With that, I'm going to share my screen.
It's always so complicated every time I go to share a screen, even though I do it over and over again.
All right, Jason, can you see my screen?
I can see it. You're golden.
All right. So for today's webinar, as Chanel alluded, we're going to go through our shower installation. We'll be focusing on our low profile blue bottom installation. We'll touch a little bit on our low profile, that's a wood core installation at the end, but this will mostly be surrounding the blue bottom installation. First step is just a check of materials, conditions, make sure that, everything that we supplied is there, make sure that any equipment that you may need is on site. So this is just a quick verification that you have everything you need to have a good install. First step of installation is really just checking dimensional criteria. If you're installing a 60-inch unit, we want to make sure that the framing pocket allows for that. So we're going to check dimensional criteria to make sure, outside dimensions all align, make sure that the framing studs are all plumb, drains in the correct location, and then for the low threshold blue bottom units, that the box out, which is an 8x8 with the 3/4 recess, is in the correct location. So first step is really dimensional criteria. Once you go for it.
Real quick, can I just touch on even prior to where this point, a clean demo and when you're demoing that existing unit, I've had a lot of dealers over the years, the tighter they've done that process, cutting out the sheetrock cleanly and making sure you're not over trimming for your pocket will reduce, that finish work at the end. So even prior to the measuring, once you've got everything demoed, but really having that a clean demo and, getting your spec sheet and seeing what the size of the unit going is, and then demoing for what you need versus over demoing is a big time saver at the end of the project prior to this step.
Yeah, good point, Jason. Thanks for adding that in a remodel scenario. Moving on, so we verified our dimensional criteria. The next is to make sure our subfloor is level. So we build all of our pans to a standard. I know, different conditions are going to have different degrees of slope, but for us to set a standard level is what we require, so that way everyone can build to it, and then we're not just working off unique circumstances. So right here we're just checking the subfloor, making sure that it's level, so when we set our pan on there that we're not having to fight the subfloor, that pan that's designed to have a specific slope will meet those needs on a level subfloor.
So the floor itself needs to be level. It can't have any slope towards the drain because we have the slope built into our pan, correct?
That's correct. And if you overcompensate that, you can flex the unit outside of code where you get excessive slope to the drain. So if that's a consideration anyway, if you try to play a little slope into the subfloor, you could find yourself in a scenario of too much slope.
And if they need to, worst case, if they're dealing with something that's out of whack or too much slope, they can just use some self-leveler if they, if it's not a subfloor of some sort, correct?
Yeah, and there's several different products for that. They all work for wood subfloors, concrete subfloors. You just want to make sure you're following the instructions well. You bring up a good point, Jason. We've had instances where someone, pours a self-leveler, maybe they get it too rich with water, and that subfloor, that leveling compound degrades. And so when we try to adhere adhesive to that, you're not bonding to a member that is structurally sound, that it's almost brittle. So yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Jason. All right, moving on. So this slide's highlighted. If you guys listen to me for one slide, this would be it. For installation and installation issues that come across my desk, this step probably represents 80% plus issues, is creating that box out correctly with the drain pipe centered. So majority of the issues that we see and we investigate, we'll dig out a pan, and this step was just not followed correctly. So we've got to make sure that we have that 8x8. We've got to make sure that we have that 3/4 recess. Our pans at that point actually go below grade. So that's why we need that recess. And if the drain's not centered in there, you can hang up the pan. And in those instances, when you install it, you could see the water, it might not make it to the drain, or it kind of diverts away from the drain and finds another way there. Just if you're paying attention this whole hour, I just hope it's just these 2 minutes on this step. This step is, by far the biggest miss when it comes to installation and poor installation with our product.
Yeah, I would say probably 98% of the calls I field when it comes to a warranty issue tend to be water pooling, and it almost every time has to do with not a proper box out and the drain being held up, and there's some volcanoing happening with the drain to where we're getting some pooling somewhere, and it is just such a hard thing to fix without tearing out the unit. And this is strictly on the blue bottom barrier-free low threshold units. That this is such a big step. What if they have a 12x12 cutout? Is overcompensating better?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jason. If you extend it too far, then we're going to lose some structural integrity. Keep it an 8x8. And if you find scenarios where that's not going to happen, I would say reach out to your rep. If your rep can't answer it, then we can go to engineering. Depending on the circumstance, you might be able to get a little bit larger than an 8x8, but best practice, keep it by an 8x8. And then, if you find yourself in a scenario, just reach out to verify, so that way we can analyze that and make sure that you get a good installation. But yeah, the one dimension you don't have to worry about is the 3/4. That's a 3/4 minimum. So if that just, was by chance a floating drain pipe in the center, you'd be okay. The 3/4 is just a minimum. So if that was deeper, if that was an inch and a half, whatever you need there to keep that pipe structurally sound, that one's okay. But the 8x8, those dimensions we need to keep pretty tight.
Got it.
All right, moving on. Just getting some housekeeping. If you're working in an environment that you're creating dust, maybe cutting and whatever it may be, grinding the subfloor, whatever that could cause. Once again, we're going to use adhesive to bond our unit to the subfloor. If that has debris or dust, whatever it may be, you want to make sure that our adhesive is making contact with the subfloor, so it's bonding to the subfloor, not bonding to debris or dust or something like that. So just a quick housekeeping step to make sure that your adhesive is going to meet the subfloor correctly. Next is a dry fit. So, you know, if you're going to listen to me twice throughout this presentation, this would be the second time. So, you know, this is just a step to ensure that your pan's going to behave properly before you adhere it down. So, the four levels on the perimeter there, those are all checks to make sure that the unit is level. Those should all be reading level. They come off the mold level. We do checks off our units to ensure that these are level. And then the one in the interior is all just designed for slope to the drain. So you just want to ensure that you're getting, you know, adequate slope to the drain. You know, why this step is so important is if, you know, by chance, you know, the box out got done incorrectly, maybe the debris, a lot of our previous steps, this step right here would catch all that. And finding it here is a lot less expensive, and the amount of time and resources needed to fix an issue at this stage is a lot less than when you actually adhere it down. So, you know, if I'm blessed enough for you to listen to me twice, this would be the second step that I would, you know, drive home, is to, you know, do that dry fit. It's an easy one to skip, or there's maybe just some confidence that you feel like, you know, you've got it under control, but just to ensure that, you know, your install is going to be successful, please follow through with the dry fit, because if you do have issues, this will be the cheapest place to find it.
Bob, that center level, I'm assuming you move that around the pan to make sure everything from all sides is sloping towards the drain, not just, don't just check from one side, but check from all sides, back, front,
Yep, that's
left, right.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good point. Sorry, I didn't dive deeper into that. So our slopes in quadrants. So if you look at the drain and you were to kind of cut 4 pie slices to the corners, that's how our slope's designed. So you'd kind of want to sweep that in a, you know, clockwise or counterclockwise motion, and just keep verifying slope around that drain to ensure that, you know, the left side looks good, but if the right side doesn't, you know, maybe the drain was too far to the right on the box out in this, and then raising that up, you'd catch that in this step. So yeah,
And
thanks.
it's such a, it's, you can't see it from the naked eye. Like, it looks great. It could be a 16th of an inch difference, but all of a sudden that 16th of an inch, you've got a little pool that will never go away if you don't cap it in time.
Yep. Thanks, Jason. Next step is just installing the drain assembly here. I'm sure most people on the call are very familiar with this. You know, one thing I'd say about our product on the back side of the unit there, we back grind our drain to try to get a 3/8 landing pad for that fiber gasket, or so that fiber gasket will hit, and then the rubber gasket. We try to make sure that depth is set there, so you get a complete contact seal, not just, you know, like an 8 or a small amount of a bite there. We try to ensure that we encompass that whole seal to ensure the greatest seal for the drain and pipe. So one thing to notice on the backside of the unit. And then, yeah, as far as drain assembly goes, I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with how those are put together. Another step, just a kind of a tip here. You know, if you're working in a colder environment, our adhesive can change viscosity with temperature. So the colder it is, the harder it is to dispense. This is just a warming bag. You know, I think those are roughly around 80, 85 degrees. You know, if you put that in a couple hours before your install, it just makes injecting the adhesive a little bit easier. We just thin that viscosity a little bit. You know, if you're in a colder climate, this would be something that you might want to think about. There's several different ways to go about heating this up. You don't want to, you know, take a burner to it, but you know, if you're in a room temperature area, you're fine. Just a tip for those who work in colder climates.
Yeah, and I've seen guys that don't have the bags, you know, use hot water, buckets of hot water to warm them up. You're doing a lot of installs, which that's the goal, is we want our guys doing a lot of installs. Investing in a power gun is a big time saver and forearm saver, from what I've been told. So these can be pretty tricky to get out with just a handgun, if especially if you're doing a unit a day.
Yep. And yeah, that powered gun is worth its weight in gold. I mean, it's $100 at Home Depot or around there. Yeah, you'll get your return on that very quick in labor savings. The one caution that I would say when you get those is the mating side for those is a little bit oversized, so it can handle a variety of dispensing, sizes. Just when you place that in there, there's a piston that's driving down. Just make sure that that's on the same plane. Regardless of what material you're using, if you don't, you can kind of pinch that tube in there, and I've seen cases where that tube will explode if you're not careful of that piston driving on the same plane as the tube. But
I think I would be the one that exploded the gun. Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I've seen it happen a couple times, just grabbing a gun and not looking at what you're doing, but just making sure you're using the equipment as intended. Another tip here is doing a purge step. So we supply an adhesive that's a 2-part. It's got a resin system and a hardening system. All 2 parts are manufactured the same way, and when they put the cap on that, some air can get trapped in, and it'll gel some of the hardener. So just to make sure that you're putting yourself in the best place to succeed, just take that initial tip off, inject a little bit. You'll notice off that first injection won't be even. So you'll kind of see that happening, and then after you do that little purge, just add the static mixing tube. So just best practices here that it's a 2-part adhesive, so you want to make sure you get good mixture. This would just be a best practice to get that.
Bob, just another thing I've ran into a couple times. Every once in a while, epoxy goes missing, whether it went missing in the field because it got tossed, or somehow it got missed with shipping. Is there an epoxy they can pick up that's comparable to ours from a local big box store?
Yeah, good point. There's several different anchoring adhesives. This is just a style of an anchoring adhesive. The big thing when you pick one out, though, is to validate your cure times and working times. Most of those, at a big box store will tell you, you've got a 15-minute, 1 hour, 3-day, whatever it may be, will give you those times. You just want to pick one that's going to work for your application. So, if you're going to pick an adhesive that's going to take 3 days, you just have to be cognizant of that, I've got to keep this weighted down for 3 days. I can't, give it 20 minutes and then hop on it. And then vice versa. If you get one that's hot, that's, going to cure in 10 minutes, you're putting yourself in a bad place, because getting all these down and getting your pan down in that time frame might be cutting it a little tight. So yep, just look for anchoring adhesives. If you're unfamiliar, uncomfortable with them, we field questions all the time about that, and if you need recommendations, just reach out to your rep and we can make sure that we can find you something. If you have stores close to you, whether that's a Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever, we can kind of look online as well to see what's available there. So yeah, we supply this just so you don't have to go and acquire that yourself. But if that happens, please reach out. Another thing with our adhesive is it's labeled with working times. It's got both English and Spanish translation. So, if you look at our adhesive tube, it'll kind of give you your working time designed with your climate. So they're all, it's a chemical reaction, so it's susceptible to temperature. So the hotter it is, the quicker it'll go. The colder it is, the slower it will. And it give you a temperature range on the bottle, so you don't have to guess at that. Good question there, Jason. Moving on. Next step is injecting the adhesive. So what we're looking at here is a 6x6 grid of adhesive. We're going to be 4 inches from the side walls and back wall, and then 2 inches up on the threshold. And then each of these dollops are going to be 3/4 of an inch tall. I always recommend, finding an index, whether that's, a 3/4 inch piece of wood, the first couple that you inject, instead of trying to have to measure those or guess. If you just have, an index there that you can place, once you get a couple in there, then you can kind of index off those for the rest. The height is important. You know, I've seen individuals try to trowel this on. The height allows us to make contact with the unit and make proper contact. There's cases where, you know, if you don't make enough contact with our unit, then, you know, you're not going to get that good bond. So keep in mind that 3/4, 1 inch dimension there when you're applying the adhesive. And then, you know, what I always also recommend is when you're applying this, always start from the back of the pan and work your way towards the front. So that way you're always working away from your mess and not working into it. You get this adhesive on you a couple times and then you learn that tip pretty quick. All right, moving on. The next step is we're going to set the pan down, do one more dimensional check. You know, if something happened between now and your dry fit, this is a good chance to check it. It's still not the best place to find an issue, but it's definitely better than when the adhesive cures. And then the image to the right kind of gives you that, you know, depending on your flavor, if you want to go counterclockwise or clockwise, gives you some locations to put the level and check for that slope. So one last, you know, verification that everything is working as intended to give you a good install.
Yeah, once that's cured, you basically need a backhoe to rip that thing out.
Yep, it's very yeah, it's very extensive. And then depending on your case, you know, there's a variety of different ways of going about it, but none of them are extremely affordable, I'll say that.
No.
So now that we've got the adhesive in there, one thing I wanted to mention before we move on this step is when you have that adhesive, it is a chemical cure, and then you're going to place that unit down. So you're not going to really know the degree of cure. I always recommend grabbing, you know, 2 pieces of scrap wood, cardboard, doesn't matter, you know, put a little adhesive on that and then, you know, smash those together. That way you have an idea of your degree of cure without checking the pan. When this adhesive is placed, you don't want to play that guessing game. You know, if you're in a colder climate and it's taken longer, you pull the weight out and it hasn't cured, you know, you might get some flex out. And then that adhesive, when you get back onto your unit, you'll hear cracking. And that's just that adhesive, you know, wasn't fully cured. It came up almost like in a stringy way. And then you compress it and then you get that adhesive to fill, you'll hear, you know, cracking, you know, you'll hear it once at least when you hop in the pan. So if you take that sample piece to the side as a test, you can evaluate your degree of cure before you take the weight off. And then you'll feel confident that, hey, you know, I've got a good bond here, I've got a good cure, I'm able to remove the weight. So
I haven't heard that before. That's a great way to measure that.
yeah, it's just a difficult way to you know, understand your cure when it's hidden from you. So this gives you an opportunity to kind of see that and then analyze it, especially if you're trying to work on schedule and times and everything like that. It gives you an indicator. Now we're going to place some weight on the unit. We do have some weight plates, and the way to fabricate those is outlined in the install instructions. Really what we're doing here is grabbing some runners to place on our slope lines, and then a piece of wood to disperse that load onto those runners. So we're just trying to weigh down our slope lines and make sure that, you know, we get a good bond, a good adhesion to both our base and the subfloor. One thing I'd like to mention with this install, any UPC unit, so any unit that's compliant is all bound to a code, and that code is 150 thousandths of deflection at the drain. So after you install it, you have a 300-pound weight that goes onto the unit, and then we check deflection at the drain. That drain can't move 150 thousandths of an inch. So, you know, anybody's product that's compliant, that's just a way for you to check that to make sure that, you know, you got what you intended to get. And then, you know, all of our installation is designed around meeting, you know, that code and that deflection code.
Bob, how do you check that?
How would I check that in the field?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd most likely put an index down and then have a tape measure off that index and then load the pan with, you know, a human being that's close to 300 pounds. and then check the measurement as that human being's on it. So
Got it.
you'd have a measurement, preloaded, and then one with the load on it.
I was curious. It's an interesting scale, so I was curious how you'd measure that. But that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you just check it at the drain to make sure you're not getting any, deflection or
flow.
bounce or anything like that. And that's just you can use that for any product that's stating they're compliant. That's the code that we're bound to. So, that's just an indication when you feel like, hey, I've got a spongy floor, or, this doesn't feel like I'm getting the support that I need. That would be a way to measure that and verify that you're getting a compliant unit.
Got it.
So after the weight has cured, you checked your sample piece, you have a full cure. If you're doing that at the end of the day and you're coming back the next day, you're going to feel confident that it's cured. We're going to come by and pre-drill. I always recommend, pre-drilling these before, because you don't want to crack the nailing flanges. I know they're not shown after walls go up and finishing pieces go up, but just best practice, pre-drill. And then come back after your pre-drill. These are just going to be into the stud. You're going to pre-drill and then come back with a screw to fasten that to the studs. Try to stay away from impact wrenches or impact guns on this, because even if you pre-drill, you can kind of suck those down and suck them through the unit, especially if someone's getting a little aggressive with it. So just be mindful of the equipment selection and using it as intended. Now we're going to just finish off the drain, put in the gasket locking nut. I've seen several different tools come out lately that make this a little bit easier. We do install training here quite frequently, and that little piece on top there, we drop that in the drain quite frequently. I would feel confident saying everyone here has probably experienced that. So if you're looking for a way not to do that, they've made some tools that go around that a little bit easier to tighten that. But if you don't have that, you're just placing that in there using a flathead screwdriver, and then tightening that down to get good compression around the drain pipe. After that's achieved, then you're just going to snap on the drain screen from there. Before we get into wall installation, I just want to touch on, we went through our blue bottom installation. That requires adhesive, weight plates, curing times. You do get a lower threshold with that. And as I said, we're bound by code. When the threshold increases, we're switching from a, foam integrated support to a wood core. And then that wood core meets that deflection code without any adhesive or having to weigh it down. And so you'd follow the same installation steps minus a lot of the adhesive and weight steps. You just be setting that pan in, dry fitting. Once you did your dry fit, drain assembly, from drain assembly, then you're going right to install. So the reason why we're not able to do that at lower thresholds is just the amount of height that we need. As that threshold decreases, the space underneath the pan decreases. So to get that lower threshold, we need to use that integrated support. But when the threshold gets a little taller, we're able to get in a wood core, and that wood core stands by itself and meets code.
I just want to comment on that real quick, because I'm a huge proponent of our wood bottom curbless units. The difference in curb height from a barrier-free 3/4 inch blue bottom pan to get the wood bottom wood core and not have to use any epoxy, not have to go through a lot of these steps, it's only 3/4 of an inch taller. So once you hit 1.5 inches, now it's a wood backed pan, and you alleviate a lot of these steps. So it really is dependent on the customer's needs. And if they truly need something that low, or if they have mobility and they can maneuver over 1.5 inch threshold, it's still curbless coming out and 1.5 inches going in. So it only changes by 3/4 of an inch, but it does shave off quite a few installation hours utilizing that wood core product.
Yeah, and just some of the stuff that reaches my desk is, understanding your flooring, your pocket conditions. That way you're buying the correct product for your application. Will save you time, money, headache. And your reps are, well educated to, point you in the right direction. Just need to know that information. A lot of people just pick the lowest threshold, because they consider it the lowest entry, but depending on your condition, that might not be the case.
Well, in my own personal home, I have a wood core unit with a traditional threshold, so a 90-degree threshold. And that was recessed onto my floor joists with support around it. And so I actually have a zero transition because I was able to recess it down, sitting onto the floor joists. So there are some cool alternatives with the wood backed pan. It just gets a little more advanced installation.
Yep. All right. Now moving on to wall installation. We're just going to be going over spring clip. We do have some snap joint. Spring clip is the majority of our wall system for installation. So we'll just be reviewing that through this webinar. What we're showing here is just a standard 5-piece unit. So you're going to have 2 back walls, 2 side walls. What we're looking at here is the first lower back wall for installation. The bottom of that unit indexes off our sheetrock ledges on our pan. So we're going to set that unit on there, check for level. Once we check for level, we're able to attach that to the studs. Moving on from there is the upper back wall. So we have some index pins and some holes that made up. So this gives you an idea of how to match those up, and they're designed here at the factory. So that way, you don't have to do any guesswork on the field. We're just going to slide those pins down, make sure they engage in the holes there. That'll help, from left to right, having those 2 unique pieces help them align correctly.
One quick comment on that: every once in a while, I've taken a call where those pins don't align. Just for some weird reason, something happened where a pin's off 1/8 of an inch, or you can easily bore those holes out to be able to move on with your installation and just make the holes a little bigger if you ever run into that in the field, without having to worry about getting a new wall or, have something else shipped to you. So it doesn't happen very often, but I have had those calls on occasion. And the quick response is just take a drill, bore it out, and you got a little bit bigger hole for the pin to line up if it's off 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jason. Thanks for bringing that up. Now that we've got it indexed, we're just going to take a level to make sure that, from the base to the lower back wall to the upper back wall, all of our indexes are reading correctly. Make sure that that's level. Check that at the very top of the sheetrock ledge there. Once you verified that, then we're just going to fasten that wall same way we did the pan and back wall to the studs. Next step is we supply a construction adhesive to our spring clip on the back. So as those walls made in to the spring clip, that construction adhesive will cure over time and then stop any, flex once those are engaged. So you'll engage the sidewall in there, that spring clip will go back towards the cove, that adhesive will cure and lock in, and then that'll stop any movement, down the road for those walls once they're engaged.
Bob, real quick on that last slide.
This one?
Yeah, and this kind of falls back all the way to the first slide of checking your pocket. What can happen if that back wall is not plumb? When you install this and then you screw that back wall in and then you go to put your sidewalls in, do you have any idea what
Yeah, I mean, you're that seam in the middle, you'll see a discrepancy in there, depending on, what's at a level. So if you're tilted one way or tilted another way, you're just not gonna get things to align correctly. So, you're gonna see that in your seams. It's gonna make it harder for the walls to engage. And then, if you have a subway or tile pattern, you're going to see that as well, because when these are designed and created, they're designed to have that grout line match all the way throughout that unit. But if you're tilted one direction or the other, you're going to see gaps in your seam that are going to be inconsistent, and then you're going to see misaligned tile lines.
Yeah, I would say, what I've seen is, with that back wall not being plumb, then you go to put your sidewalls in, even if it was just a little bit, maybe a little gap at the bottom, like a little 1/4 inch gap that you just can't seem to get tight. where and I think this came up on the last installation call, you do have the ability to bring the pan out a little bit. You know, if you need to bring the pan out a 1/4 inch and use some shims, or, you know, our products, being that they're wood backed, are stable enough to be able to utilize shims. So if your wall's not plumb just by like a 1/4 inch, you can shim it and be able to get the plumb that you're looking for without having to reframe that wall.
Yeah, good point. Shims will be your friend for sure. So we touched on that. Next step, you know, get to your plumbing wall. You want to make sure that you measure this correctly. So, you know, if you're trying to fix some of these holes, that can be costly as well. So we always recommend measuring, you know, from the molded side of the unit. So that would be inside the nailing flange to the left, or, you know, if you're going to come down, you want to come off that top sheetrock ledge and down. Those are going to be true measurements. You know, if you're going off in this picture, the right side, the spring clip side, you'll see some geometry in that sidewall, so your index isn't going to be as good. So you just want to make sure that you're measuring correctly from, you know, left to right, and then top down. You know, once you drill into these walls, that definitely becomes a different repair than just a small chip or something like that. That's a little more extensive, both in money and time. So be diligent about your measuring. You know, I'm sure anyone that's installed a handful of units has messed this up once, and that's a mistake that you only do once. But for our product, if it helps, you know, going off the left to right and then top down gives you your most true measurements when drilling these out. Just again, going through that, our units, you know, will slide that into that spring clip there to engage it. We'll flex it back, you know, especially in this scenario where we have the holes, you're going to flex that back into the framing, and then you're just going to adhere that to the studs. Last step here. So we got all of our walls in.
Real quick, Bob, go back to that last slide. Again, this goes to the very first step of the pocket, making sure you have a stud to screw to on that outside wall. I've seen it go to the full installation, and then all of a sudden, like, oh wait, we don't, because it's not necessarily going to be on the, you know, 12-inch center or 16, that where you need that to go, there might not be a stud, so you might have to add a stud on that outside wall prior to doing your installation. So just measure that out beforehand.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And all that information will be on your spec sheet, like dimensional criteria, everything like that, where to place that last stud. Yeah, really good point, Jason. Thanks for bringing that up. Last step is just going to be silicone in the joints. You know, we supply silicone here that matches our white. And then, yeah, you'll just apply silicone there. One thing to remember is we do have weep holes in our pans. So just as a fail safe, go to this image here. So we have a cove for our back wall, and then our side wall slides into there. So you get some water retention there. You know, if you're, you know, poor silicone job, or, you know, the house moves a little bit, and then you end up with some integrity loss in that silicone, you know, water would hit that joint, come all the way down to the pan, and then, you know, you'd see it come out the weep hole. And if you're seeing water come out the weep hole, that just gives you an indication that, you know, something is going wrong here. I need to fix that. You know, that could be, you know, failed silicone joint, potential, a leak in the back of your plumbing, whatever it may be. It just gives you an early indication that, hey, I've got an issue here. And then, you know, finding that issue now compared to, you know, a subfloor or a flooring warp, drywall messed up, whatever that is, it's a little bit easier of an indicator, or earlier on than, you know, if we didn't have that, or if you do cover that up and water gets out somewhere, just gives you an indication for that. So we just skip that little component. You'll see that in the base. It'll have just a little divot there that we call a weep hole. Gives you an early indication for any water that's getting behind the unit. With that, are there any questions?
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We do have a few questions. How long should it take to fully install a unit? Obviously, there's factors involved in that, but maybe just an idea.
Jason, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, we have some dealers that are doing a lot of these pretty frequently, and they have crews that are really comfortable with them that can get them done in under a day. My typical answer for a new dealer, for your first 10 jobs, give yourself 2 days when you're bidding it, 2.5 days. Who's comfortable with it. And then after you've done a handful of them, it starts to get more streamlined as you learn how to demo properly. We didn't touch on the trim kits, but if you're utilizing a trim kit with this, that's going to shave off a lot of the installation time of sheetrock, tape, texture, repair, paint. So when you demo cleanly and then you install the unit, you can use one of our trim kits to be able to go right over top of that nailing flange and finish off the project without having to add all those additional labor time consuming points of installation of sheetrock and repairing the sheetrock and taping it and painting it to match. So the goal is ideally in a day. These can be a true 1 day install once you have a crew that's confident with how they go together.
Great.
Yeah, good point. And then, yeah, if you go wood bottom, you can expedite your installation time.
How do I level a concrete floor?
As we stated, I would use a self-leveling compound. I think there's a handful of different ones. Quick Level's one that I've seen probably the most frequently. That's just a sold at local hardware stores, whatever the instructions are, adding a certain amount of water, and then you can pour that leveling compound on there. You got to be mindful of your recess, so you want to make sure that you're not flooding that or using some kind of framework there, and then your threshold as well. Some require primers, so if depending on your subfloor, you might need a primer to go on first, just depending on your condition. But there's several different products out there. So finding the one that fits best for your application or your situation would be worth the investigation.
I am by no means a contractor, but I have personally used a self-leveler, and it was a lot easier than I thought it was. I was pretty intimidated by it, but then you mix it, pour it down, and it fills in all the gaps that need leveled.
Alrighty, and what do I do if water is cooling and not draining?
So if you're having an issue where, if I understand the question right, like, hey, I installed my shower base and I've got water that's not going to the drain, it's a Bestbath unit. We'd want to investigate why that's happening. As I stated earlier on, before I hear any information, I would, gamble 90% of the time that box out was done incorrectly. So if it's in that case, more frequently than not, we're removing a pan and reinstalling it, or cutting a pan up and trying to put another one in. So it's definitely an expensive issue when you solve it at that time, but typically that's what's happening. I mean, there's some rare cases where maybe the drain pushed the unit up and you're able to unlock the drain and get it coming back down, but 9 out of 10 times it's poor installation.
All right, and what are best practices to make sure the unit is watertight?
As far as the silicone, we do have some measures there for if water does come behind that, but the way our product's designed, we're putting you in a good place to not worry about water retention and providing indicators. You just want to make sure that you have silicone on those joints, and then you have the fail safe behind that. But outside of that, there shouldn't be any concern for water retention.
Okay, and you guys did mention a couple of times as far as preparation of the install area as being kind of like the biggest mistake you see out in the field. Is there any other that come to mind that we can help our team avoid?
I would say another one I see is the adhesive. You know, some individuals will just throw the static mixing tube away, inject adhesive in whatever wild pattern or, you know, unique fashion. You know, you're given all the materials there, just make sure you're using them correctly. But, you know, we'll get questions about, you know, the adhesive didn't harden and then they pull the pan up and then you see, you know, that there was just troweled on, you know, lines of white and green or, you know, whatever that is. They just didn't get a good mix. They just didn't use the equipment that was supplied. I'm not sure for you, Jason, but I'd say that's, you know, second is adhesive and application of it.
I would say just even leaning more heavy on that first comment, and then it also leans towards how long does it take to install. The majority of time spent on the install tends to be prepping for the install. If you prep properly, the install is going to go really smooth. And I've even personally been on a job site doing an install training where we missed some of the steps. And when we actually went to do the install, you know, we ran into that quarter gap because the back wall wasn't plumb, or, you know, so taking your time on the prep and making sure the pocket's good, the unit's going to go in seamlessly. But you run into the issues with the unit going in by not having the pocket prepared beforehand. So take your time on the prep is the biggest one.
Awesome. Would you suggest a mud set for wood bottom pans?
My answer is always no, not necessary with our wood bottom pans.
Do we have
Yeah.
dealers that do?
Yeah,
Sorry, Jason, go for it.
but we do have, we just out of old habits die hard. It's hard to put. I'll use my personal contractors when they had never installed a Bestbath shower, and when I told them they did not need to do any of that, they didn't believe me. So it's more out of just comfort level that I've found people do that just because if that's how they've always done it, rather than an actual need for it.
Yeah, I'd second that.
All right. And what is the best way to clean and maintain our unit?
So we do provide a cleaning and maintenance manual. It'll have it on there. So that'll point you to the correct procedures. You know, really staying away from any cleaner with adhesives or abrasives. So, you know, anything that's got a sand or something like that in the cleaner, you want to stay away from. So just non-aggressive cleaners will definitely extend the life of your product or not degrade any of the gel coat. So, you know, that's a document we share. So you'll always have access to it. So you don't really need to remember it, but we do have a document outlined for, you know, cleaning and maintenance. Just stay away from aggressive cleaners.
So I need to quit using acetone, is what you're saying, Bob.
Acetone's good. It's just
Okay.
anything with sand in it. I mean, I don't know about acetone being good for yourself and everyone else around you, but as far as, you know, cleanliness, you know, we have a, you know, 30-year warranty on it. We wouldn't believe our product could handle that if, you know, it wouldn't last that long. So, you know, you just have to be mindful of, you know, aggressive cleaners.
Got it.
All right. And what are some install selling points that would help sell to a homeowner?
Bob, I can jump in on this one.
Go for it.
I think the big ones that a lot of our dealers lean on is, and it's a term that Robert G coined and I've adopted, that this is truly a single component system. Almost everything else out on the marketplace, you're looking at a multi-component. And when I say that, you need a lot of other products to install most other showers. You need backing, barrier, green board, adhesive, like you need a lot of other materials to complete an install on almost every other shower that's out there, where this is truly a single component. So by being a single component, the benefit is those are less areas for places to fail in the future. You know, tile showers, you have caulk or grout you have to constantly maintain and keep sealed. And, those are failure points where having a single component system, there are less failure points in the future for the longevity of the shower. So that's a big selling feature for a lot of our dealers that lean on that. This is the only product you need to utilize to install in the home.
Chanel, sorry, can you repeat that question?
What are some installation selling points that would help sell to a homeowner? So when a dealer's in the
Yeah.
home selling to a homeowner, some of these are benefits to our installer, right? But how can they translate that to a benefit?
Yeah, so, as Jason was alluding that, we have a wood core in our unit. We've tested that in a grab bar situation. The last test we did, the lab stopped it at 1,000 pounds because it became unsafe. So when we've tested it in the past, we would actually break the grab bar before the fasteners failed. So that structure is throughout the whole shower wall. And so when you look at, how's this going to look down the road if I want to put a grab bar, a seat, a soap dish, whatever, you don't have to worry about, what's back there. And I always see that as a concern of, different units of, hey, I'd like to put this here, but when I push my thumb against it, I can see it flexing, and that's going to require aggressive toggle bolts or some kind of anchoring system to get any kind of attachment there. So, having the quality of product and integrity of it, to me, is a good selling point for an end user.
Great. That's all we have. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
No, I think Bob did a great job. I can sit in on these and I always pick up something new, like the testing the epoxy on 2 pieces of wood to see if it's cured or not. Like I get a new tidbit whenever I do these. So great job, Bob.
Thank you, Jason. I do appreciate everyone hopping on. I'm going to drive home. The 2 points I hope you listened to was the dimensional criteria on the box out where the drain location is, and then the dry fit. I hope you just paid attention for those couple minutes because that'll save you a lot of grief down the road.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll send out a recording to all of those who registered for the webinar. And so for any reason you come up with other questions, feel free to respond to that email that you get the blast from. And we have a dedicated engineering department, a dedicated sales team. Everybody's here to help if you have questions. So please feel free to reach out. Keep an eye out for that recording. Thanks, Jason and Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.